I guess I had heard about sungazing on and off from a number of sources for years. Gene Savoy used to run full-page and even four-page ads for a school and a teaching system he was offering called Project X. Gene would mention sungazing in these ads prominently, but he's one of the few people who's larger than life, and apparently, even according to People magazine, he was the mold, he was the archetype that led to the whole Indiana Jones movies. I would say that it is not a rote rule that when you get to 12 to 20 minutes of sungazing, if you're doing that HRM method, that all of your emotional and mental problems will be gone, and that by 30 minutes all of your physical problems will be gone, and that by 40 minutes you'll not only be at least 10 or 20 years younger than your biological age, but you'll also just be far healthier, and that by 44 minutes you'll be without food. I say, give me a break.
We do pray to Thee, O God, to anoint Thy children's eyes and bodies for truth and for wisdom, to give Thee thanks, and must plead with Thee at the dawning of the light. Heal us, O God, with Thy rays of light. We the strong and righteous receive Thee as our celestial Christ, our only Savior and Redeemer, who shines on us, and may receive a gentle baptism of light. I became known as an explorer. I found numerous lost temples and cities, and I had read about secret priesthoods of the sun that lived to great ages, and I was trying to figure out how those priests could live longer than normal people based on the sun, and what was it? So instead of reading about it, because you could find no literature on it, I had to experience it for myself. So I became a sun gazer, I suppose you could call it that. But I found out through experience that there was more to the power of the sun than just looking at it. I quested after the knowledge that I could find in the light of the sun.
The techniques that we employ are fundamental as well as advanced. We've been doing that since we were born, and prior to, because both of our parents were doing it at the same time. So imagine if alcohol affects you if you're in the womb, well then therefore sunlight must also. Because sunlight affects you on the cellular level, therefore on the genetic level. So for me, solar viewing is a matter of something completely natural. It's second nature. Now, how do we employ solar viewing for a purpose, for our own spiritual growth? That becomes a liturgical question.
So be it, the divine service is completed, for which we give thanks unto Thee.
The early church was a solar religion. What happened subsequently with Rome, when they outlawed and they banned looking at the sun, it changed the church. Because the early Christians were looking at the sun.
The only way that an individual can understand what Jesus was doing was to look at the sun. You had to understand what he was doing. Why was he doing it? Why did they look at the sun? Because they wanted to bring faculties, spiritual faculties that were normally dormant in the individual awake. And once those faculties were awake, they could then understand and comprehend what he was doing. I think that's the real power of the message of Jesus. That's the real power.
The physical sun is a gateway to another world, to another sun. There is the sun behind the sun. And that is the objective. That is the goal. How you use the physical sun to get there is a very highly advanced process.
It is scientific. This whole system is scientific in the sense that the more energy you can take into your system, the more you have to learn how to decode it, how to use it. If you don't look at the sun properly, with the right attitude, and you don't know how to distinguish between the positive and the negative, or the creative and the destructive forces, it can just consume you.
We're seeking our origins. Who are we? What are we? Why are we here? We're trying to get back to our origins. That's the whole idea.
All the great ancient religions were solar religions, including early Christianity. What happens with the initial stages of sun gazing is that one's consciousness is expanded. And once that begins to happen, all kinds of things happen.
What the sun does is, if you're taking more energy into yourself, okay, and the eye is a receptor for that energy streaming in through the retina, the cones, and the rods, and so forth, you're going to be giving more energy to your body, to your cells, to your nervous system. And now imagine what is happening inside yourself. You're becoming electrically charged. Isn't that going to affect you? Of course it's going to affect you. You are going to, your glands, your organs are begin to operate on a level that is maybe a little bit beyond what you would normally know. So you're going to have this sense of higher sensory perception. Sixth sense, call it whatever you want.
And how to observe and perceive that sun is the object, and was the object, of these higher teachings, of these old mystical schools.
Many, many manuscripts have been found which point to these solar traditions. And in the Bible, you can find many references to these traditions. And we know that Jesus was into the solar teachings because he talked about them. In the New Testament, there are many, many references. Once one comes into the sun, comes into the teachings, and realizes the true origins of these teachings, all these things become clear.
I cannot convince anyone in 10 minutes of the value or the beauty of this teaching. It's impossible. And even if you say, I understand, you don't. You have to experience it. It doesn't do any good to read about what other people have done. You have to experience it.
I understand that people are thirsty for this information on how to view the sun. I think people need to be cautious for many reasons. On the physical and physiological level, they need to be aware of what happens when they take in physical solar energy. They also need to be aware what can happen on the emotional, the psychological, the psychic, and the spiritual levels of their being.
There have been many solar schools throughout history, not just ours. At this time, we feel that we have the authorized teachings, and that if people are going to actually get involved with sun gazing and these kinds of techniques, they really need to seriously think about what they're getting into and look for some guidance, and that's what our school offers. It can be very dangerous for people to look at the sun on their own. They can hurt their eyes. They can have experiences, emotional experiences, transitions, and physical things that could be problematical if they are not aware of what's happening and have guidance, a true scientific understanding of what's going on. So it's not a good idea to just do this on one's own.
People have been intrigued by the idea that one could look at the sun for long periods of time and not have physical damage or be able to survive that process or even be able to take in that much energy at one time. My father did experiment in his early days with solar viewing when he was first involved with what is it, how do I go about this, how do I experience what the ancients were experiencing. He did go about this long process and looked at the sun for long periods of time. The results of that, which have been chronicled in some of his books, were that his physical body began to experience results that were not very comfortable.
Looking at the sun for long periods of time can activate the spiritual faculties. Just looking at the sun isn't going to achieve anything. It has to be a science. This idea that you can live off the light of the sun, that it's food, is a bunch of nonsense. The food that it gives is spiritual, not physical. You want to live off the light of the sun? You can do it. Nothing wrong in that. Are you going to live forever? That's another question. You overdo it, you stop eating, you have a vegetarian diet, you live on raw fruits and vegetables, and you become very, very sensitive.
When I look at the sun, am I looking at the sun for a purely physical benefit? Am I looking at the sun because I want to be more beautiful, because I want to be younger, because I want to be glowing, because I want to get tan? Am I looking at the sun because I want to experiment to see how much damage my eye can take? Those are physical reasons for looking at the sun. If you limit sun viewing to that, then you're missing out on the real reason to look at the sun. I mean, it's nice to sit down on the beach and watch a sunset. It's very calming and very soothing. Do it. That's not the problem. The problem is when you're looking at the sun and you're staring into it and you're trying to use it for a personal and selfish reason, then you get in trouble.
I mean, we have a lot of techniques that we do not teach publicly. They are never put into the printed word, never. And there are reasons for that. And even if they are printed, they will not be understood.
The true gospel is oral. It's never written. The teaching of Jesus was not written. The Gospels are stories that were written, we know, decades after the death of Jesus. The reason that the Gospel is never written and that the truth is never written and that certain truths are never written is to prevent misuse. There is goodness and there is evil in the world. Likewise, there is goodness, there is evil, light, darkness, logos, kalos within the sun. As has been mentioned, there have been dark solar religions, and there have been very powerful people over the ages that have used the powers of the sun for very terrible things. So that is why the teaching in its entirety is never put to the written word, and why the teachers and the holders of these secrets are so guarded and so cautious, You wouldn't want that information to get into the wrong hands, because great damage can be done on the physical level as well as on the cosmic level.
So all these books that are written, the Gospels and so on, about Jesus are encoded. You have to learn how to decipher what was meant by the teachings of Jesus, what he meant.
The key to looking at the sun and taking a benefit from it beyond the physical is to understand that through it is coming information to you that can be used for the salvation of the world.
The whole secret of our process of teaching is to participate in the evolution of the species. The evolution of the species in a reasonable, logical, spiritual manner, which was the object of all the ancient orders, and to perpetuate existence as we know it on a higher level.